I'm not paying $40 for ribs anymore. This old Texas Pitmaster trick beats any BBQ joint $41 and change. That's what I paid for a half rack of ribs 3 Fridays ago at a place that shall remain nameless. But if you live anywhere near a major city, you know exactly the kind of place I'm talking about. Reclaimed wood walls, a guy with a beard that could file taxes as a dependent, mason jars for the sweet tea, and a half rack of ribs, 5 bones, maybe 6 if they were feeling generous, for $41. I sat there in my truck in the parking lot because I'm not proud, and I ate those ribs with my hands off the styrofoam container on my center console, and about halfway through the 3rd bone I had a thought that I could not shake. My grandfather used to make ribs better than this in a hole he dug in his backyard in Lockhart, Texas, using a piece of corrugated tin, some cinder blocks, and a temperature gauge he stole off a broken oven. And it cost him, adjusted for inflation, about $4 a rack. That's the moment this whole thing started. Not this video, the whole journey that led to this video. Because what I've come to understand after spending the better part of a year going down this rabbit hole is that the entire modern Texas barbecue industry, the trailers, the 4-hour lines, the reservation systems, the resale market for brisket, all of it, is selling you something that your own backyard with about $60 of equipment and one piece of knowledge nobody bothers to teach you anymore can absolutely destroy. I'm going to show you that piece of knowledge today. Stick with me because this isn't a buy an expensive smoker video. This is the opposite of that video. Quick version of who I am for anybody who's new here. I'm not a pitmaster. I don't own a restaurant. I didn't grow up working a competition circuit. What I am is somebody who got obsessed in an embarrassing, middle of the night, 40 tabs open kind of way with figuring out why backyard barbecue is so wildly inconsistent and why the good barbecue in this country got priced like a Michelin meal despite being historically one of the cheapest ways to feed a family that humans ever invented, because that's the part that should bother you. Barbecue, real Texas barbecue, was invented as a way to make cheap, tough cuts of meat, the stuff nobody wanted, taste incredible through nothing but time, smoke, and patience. Brisket used to be the cut butchers gave away. Ribs were what was left after the good stuff got sold. This entire cuisine is built on turning garbage into gold using nothing but fire and knowledge. Somewhere along the way, we forgot the knowledge part and started paying other people $41 to remember it for us. I'm not doing that anymore. And after today, I don't think you will either. Let's be honest about something first, because I don't want this video to feel like empty hype. If backyard barbecue were easy, nobody would be lining up outside those trailers at 7 a.m. The reason people pay is because most home attempts at real barbecue are genuinely bad. I know because mine were, for years. Here's the typical arc. You buy a cheap propane or charcoal grill, you throw some ribs or a brisket on it. You either torch the outside and leave the inside raw and tough, or you dry the whole thing out into something resembling jerky with a personality disorder. You get frustrated, you conclude that real barbecue requires a $5,000 offset smoker, a culinary degree, and access to post oak that's been aged like wine. You give up and you go back to paying $41 a rack. I want to walk you through exactly where that arc goes wrong, because understanding the failure points is what makes the fix make sense. Failure point 1, temperature chaos. Most home cooks are fighting their heat source the entire cook. A cheap grill spikes to 400 degrees when you're not looking, then crashes to 200 when the coals die down. Meat doesn't care about your intentions. It cares about consistent, sustained temperature over hours. Every time that temperature swings wildly, you're either overcooking the outside or undercooking the inside, and there's no fixing that after the fact. Failure point 2, fighting the wrong kind of heat. This one's sneaky. A lot of people think low and slow just means turning the dial down. It doesn't. It means using indirect heat. Heat that surrounds the meat rather than blasting it directly, combined with enough airflow to keep smoke moving instead of pooling and turning bitter. Direct heat at low temperature just dries meat out slowly instead of quickly. It's still wrong, just wrong in a more patient way. Failure point 3, the myth of expensive equipment. This is the one that keeps the $41 rib industry in business. People assume that because a barbecue restaurant has a 12-foot steel smoker that costs more than a used car, that's what you need at home to get comparable results. It's not. It genuinely is not. What that giant smoker is doing mechanically is holding a stable temperature and circulating smoke evenly around the meat for a long period of time. That's it. That's the whole trick. You do not need 12 feet of steel to accomplish that. You need to understand the principle, and then you need a cheap, clever way to replicate it. Failure point 4, and this is the big one, the one nobody talks about. Almost nobody knows how to read the meat itself instead of the clock. Every recipe online tells you, cook for 6 hours. Your brisket doesn't know what time it is. It doesn't care what the recipe says. It cares about internal temperature and something called the stall, a period where the temperature plateaus for 1 to 3 hours no matter what you do. And if you don't know that's coming, you will panic, crank the heat, and ruin 4 hours of patient work in about 15 minutes. That's the real reason home barbecue fails. It's not the equipment, it's the knowledge. And that's exactly the gap my grandfather's generation never had, because they learned it hand to hand from someone who'd already made every mistake before them. Let me back up even further, actually, because I think the why of this matters more than people give it credit for. Texas barbecue historically wasn't a restaurant cuisine at all. It came out of German and Czech meat markets in the hill country, places that were literally just trying to keep meat from going to waste before refrigeration was reliable. They'd smoke it low and slow, wrap it in butcher paper, and sell it by the pound to working families who needed calories, not an experience. There was no ambiance, there was no reclaimed wood, there was a guy, a fire, and a pile of meat that would have spoiled otherwise. Somewhere between then and now, that utilitarian, working class food got repackaged as a luxury good. And look, I don't blame the pitmasters who are actually great at this. A lot of them earned every dollar through genuine skill and grinding 14-hour days. What I blame is the mythology that grew up around it. The idea that you, at home, in your own backyard, couldn't possibly touch what they're doing. That mythology is what keeps people paying $41 instead of just learning the 4 or 5 actual principles that make this work. I mentioned my grandfather, so let me actually tell you about him, because this is where the old Texas Pitmaster trick actually comes from. And I want you to understand it's not a gimmick, it's a real specific technique. He lived outside Lockhart, which, if you don't know, is basically the Vatican of Texas barbecue. 3 of the most legendary barbecue joints in the entire state are within about a mile of each other in that town. He didn't work at any of them, but he grew up around pit masters who did, and he picked up their habits the way you pick up anything from people you respect. By watching, by asking dumb questions, by getting yelled at for opening the pit too many times. The thing he always said, and it took me probably 15 years to actually understand what he meant by it, was this: the fire's not cooking the meat. The fire's cooking the air, and the air's cooking the meat. What he meant in plain terms is that great barbecue isn't about blasting meat with heat and smoke directly. It's about creating a stable little climate, a controlled pocket of hot, smoky air, and then letting that environment do slow, even work on the meat over hours. The fire itself is almost a side character. The real engine is airflow management, knowing exactly how much oxygen to feed a fire, how to position your heat source so it never directly touches your meat, and how to use cheap, dumb materials to trap and circulate heat instead of letting it escape into the yard. He did this with a hole in the ground, a sheet of tin, and some cinder blocks. Not because he was some kind of primitive genius who didn't know better. He did it because that's genuinely all you need if you understand the principle. The professional smoker is just a more convenient, more expensive way to create the exact same controlled air environment. That's the trick. It's not a secret ingredient. It's not a rub recipe, although rubs matter, and I'll talk about that. It's airflow and heat management using materials you already have or can get for almost nothing, guided by an understanding of what's actually happening inside the meat while it cooks. Before I get into the steps, let me talk gear for a second because I know somebody's going to ask, and I want to be honest about it instead of pretending you need nothing at all. You do need a few things, but none of them are expensive. You need some kind of grill or smoker with a lid. A basic charcoal kettle grill works completely fine, and you can find a decent one new for well under $100, or used for a fraction of that. You need charcoal or wood, and you want to lean toward natural lump charcoal or actual hardwood chunks rather than heavily treated briquettes, because you're going to be breathing that smoke into your meat for hours, and you want it clean. You need a reliable instant read or probe thermometer, which is maybe the single best $15 to $25 you'll ever spend in this hobby, because it eliminates almost all the guesswork that ruins home cooks. And you need something to wrap meat in during the stall or during rest. Butcher paper is traditional and what most Texas joints actually use, but aluminum foil works fine too if that's what you've got. That's genuinely it. No rotisserie attachment, no pellet hopper with a computer chip in it, no $1,000 ceramic egg. My grandfather never touched any of that, and neither did the people who taught him. On wood specifically, since people always ask, post oak is the classic Central Texas wood because it burns clean and steady and doesn't overpower the meat, but it's not the only option, and it's definitely not required. Fruit woods like apple or cherry give a milder, slightly sweet smoke. Hickory is stronger and more traditional in other parts of the South. Mesquite is intensely flavored and Texan through and through, but it's easy to overdo. Use it sparingly or in combination with something milder, because straight mesquite for 6 hours will beat your meat into submission with bitterness. The honest truth is that consistency and cleanliness of your fire matters more than which specific wood you're using. A steady fire with cheap oak will outperform an erratic fire with the fanciest wood money can buy. Let me get specific now on the actual method, because airflow management is a nice phrase, but it doesn't mean anything until you can actually do it. Here's how this breaks down in practice. Step 1. Build a 2-zone fire, always. This is non-negotiable, and it's the single biggest mistake home cooks make. You never, ever put your meat directly over your heat source for a long cook. You build your fire, charcoal, wood, whatever you're using, on one side of your grill or pit, and you put your meat on the other side, with nothing but hot air and smoke traveling across to reach it. This is the entire foundation of indirect cooking, and you can do it on a $100 kettle grill exactly as well as you can on a professional offset smoker. The size of the equipment doesn't change the principle. It only changes the convenience. On a kettle grill specifically, this means banking your coals to one side or arranging them in a ring around the outer edge with your meat sitting in the empty middle. Either version works. The point is separation between fire and meat. Step 2, Control your airflow like it's a dial, not a switch. Every grill and smoker has vents, usually one near the fire and one near the exhaust. Those vents are your actual temperature control, far more than adding or removing fuel. Open them more, the fire breathes harder and gets hotter. Close them down, the fire smolders cooler and produces more of that thick, flavorful smoke you actually want early in the cook. My grandfather used a literal flap of tin propped at different angles as his vent. You can use whatever your grill came with. The principle is identical: small adjustments, patience, and resisting the urge to overcorrect. Most people crank a vent wide open when their temperature dips, overshoot by 80 degrees, panic, slam it shut, and spend the whole cook riding a roller coaster instead of holding a steady line. A good rule of thumb: make a small adjustment, then wait 15 minutes before touching it again. The fire needs time to respond. It's not an instant reaction like a gas stove. Step 3. Understand the stall and don't panic when it happens. Somewhere around 150 to 165 degrees internal temperature, your brisket or your pork shoulder is going to stop climbing. It'll sit there for 1, 2, sometimes 3 hours, seemingly doing nothing. This is not a malfunction. This is moisture evaporating off the surface of the meat and cooling it, almost like sweat, faster than your heat source can compensate. If you don't know this is coming, you will assume something's wrong, you'll crank the heat to force it through, and you'll blow past the slow rendering of the collagen and fat that's supposed to be happening during that plateau. The exact process that turns a tough, cheap cut into something that falls apart under a fork. Knowing the stall is coming is the difference between trusting the process and sabotaging it. If you genuinely can't stand waiting it out, wrapping the meat tightly in butcher paper or foil once it hits the stall, what a lot of people call the Texas crutch, will push it through faster by trapping moisture against the surface, though purists will tell you it softens your bark slightly. That's a trade-off you get to choose, not a rule you have to follow. Step 4. Cook to temperature and feel, never to the clock. A recipe that says smoke for 6 hours is giving you an average, not an instruction. Meat thickness, outdoor temperature, wind, humidity, how many times you open the lid to peek, all of it changes your actual cook time by hours in either direction. The old timers didn't have digital thermometers reading out precise numbers, so they learned to read the meat by feel. How easily a probe or a skewer slides through with zero resistance, the way the fat renders and the bark sets. You've got it easier than they did. A cheap digital meat thermometer removes almost all the guesswork. Brisket wants to hit somewhere around 203 degrees internal before it's actually done. Not just cooked, but tender, where the collagen has fully broken down. Ribs are a little different. They don't have a single magic number the way brisket does, and instead, you're looking for what people call the bend test, where you pick the rack up with tongs from one end and it droops and starts to crack slightly on the surface without falling apart entirely. Pull meat early because the clock says 6 hours are up and you've made expensive jerky. Step 5, let it rest longer than feels reasonable. This is the step that separates a good brisket from a bad one just as much as anything that happens on the fire. When you pull meat off the heat, the juices are agitated, pushed toward the surface by all that heat. Cut into it immediately and they run straight out onto the cutting board instead of staying in the meat. A proper rest, 30 minutes minimum, an hour is better, wrapped in something insulating, lets those juices redistribute evenly through the meat. It feels like it's taking forever. It is the single most skipped step by impatient home cooks, and it will cost you more perceived quality than almost any other mistake on this list. If you want to take it a step further, wrap the rested meat in a towel and set it inside an empty cooler. It'll hold heat for hours, and the meat will keep improving the whole time. That's the whole trick laid out honestly. 2-zone fire. Airflow is your real temperature dial. understanding and trusting the stall, cooking to temperature and feel, not the clock, resting properly. None of that requires expensive equipment. All of it requires knowledge that most people simply were never taught, because the people who know it either work in restaurants and keep it close to the vest, or they're older relatives who assumed everybody already knew, or they've passed on and took it with them. I want to address something directly because I think it's the honest question underneath all of this. Can homemade barbecue using cheap equipment genuinely compete with a place that's smoking meat professionally all day, every day? Here's my honest answer, and it comes from having done this dozens of times now, side by side, comparing my own results against places I used to frequent. Restaurants are optimized for volume and consistency at scale, not for the absolute peak of any individual piece of meat. They're smoking 20 briskets at once. They're managing a pit that's feeding a line out the door for 6 hours straight. They cannot babysit any single piece of meat the way you can babysit the one brisket sitting in your backyard that you personally care about. When you cook one rack of ribs, one brisket for your own family, you have an advantage no restaurant kitchen has. Total, undivided attention on that one piece of meat. You can check it exactly when it needs checking. You can adjust your fire in real time based on what that specific piece of meat is telling you. You're not managing a business, you're managing dinner. Once you actually understand the mechanics, the two-zone fire, the airflow, the stall, cooking to temperature, that attention advantage translates directly into better, more consistent results than you're likely to get from a rushed commercial operation. Not always. Not against the true legends who've spent 30 years perfecting their specific pit, but against your average $41 rack at your average barbecue-themed restaurant with reclaimed wood walls. Genuinely, consistently, yes. Let's actually run the numbers, because I think the cost comparison is where this whole thing becomes impossible to ignore. A full packer brisket, the same cut restaurants are charging $30 to $40 a pound for once it's smoked and sliced. Cost you somewhere in the ballpark of $3 to $4 a pound raw at a decent grocery store or butcher. A 12-pound brisket raw runs somewhere around $40 to $50 total, and that feeds a family for multiple meals with leftovers for sandwiches, tacos, chili, whatever you want to do with it. At a restaurant, that same 12 pounds of finished brisket at market pricing would run you well over $300. Ribs follow the same math. A full slab of pork spare ribs typically runs somewhere in the neighborhood of $15 to $25 depending on where you're shopping, and that's a full slab, not a stingy half rack. Compare that to $41 for 5 or 6 bones and it's not even close. Add in charcoal or wood, which might run you another $10 or $15 for a full cook, and you're still coming in dramatically under what a restaurant charges while getting more meat. And once you know what you're doing, better quality control on the exact piece you're eating. You're not paying $41 for a half rack of ribs anymore. You're paying for the ribs themselves, plus your own time, which, once you actually know what you're doing, stops feeling like a chore and starts feeling like the most relaxing part of your weekend. I don't want to oversell this as effortless, because it's not, and I don't want you going into your first cook expecting flawless results. Let me flag the mistakes I made and that I see other people make constantly, even after they understand the theory. Opening the lid too often. There's a saying in barbecue circles: if you're looking, you ain't cooking. Every time you lift that lid, you lose heat and smoke. And on a smaller home setup, that heat loss is more dramatic than on a giant commercial smoker, because you've got way less thermal mass holding steady. A single lid open can cost you 15 to 20 minutes of recovery time on a smaller grill. Check your temperature with a remote probe thermometer instead of opening the lid to peek. Your patience will pay off directly in your results. Using too much wood too early. More smoke does not mean more flavor past a certain point. It means bitter, acrid meat with a texture people describe as over-smoked, without quite knowing why it tastes off. Thin, barely visible blue smoke is what you want, not thick, white, billowing smoke. If your smoke looks like a tire fire, dial back your fuel and let it burn cleaner. Most of the smoke flavor actually gets absorbed in the first couple of hours anyway, while the surface of the meat is still cool and slightly tacky. Past that point, you're mostly just cooking, not flavoring. Skipping on salt, then panicking and over-seasoning later. Salt does more than season in barbecue. It helps form the bark, that dark, flavorful crust that's honestly half the reason people love good brisket in the first place. Under salt early and no amount of sauce at the end will fix a bland interior. A simple, coarse salt and coarse black pepper rub, applied generously the night before or at least an hour ahead of time, is genuinely all you need. The fancy 14 ingredient rubs are mostly window dressing on top of that foundation. Trusting the built-in thermometer on cheap grills, almost every one of them is wildly inaccurate, sometimes by 50 degrees or more, and it's usually measuring the air near the lid, not the actual temperature where your meat is sitting. A separate, reliable probe thermometer is one of the cheapest upgrades you can make, and it will fix more inconsistent cooks than almost anything else on this list. Rushing because you're hungry and it's already been 4 hours. I get it, it smells incredible, and you've been waiting all day. But this is exactly where people abandon the stall, crank the heat, and undo hours of patient, correct cooking in the final stretch. If anything, the last hour is where discipline matters most, not accounting for weather. Wind, cold temperatures, and rain all pull heat away from your fire faster than you'd expect. And a cook that took 5 hours in July might take 7 in January using the exact same setup. Give yourself buffer time, especially on your first few attempts, and never plan dinner around an exact finish time. Plan it around a window and let the meat rest longer if it finishes early. Cutting against the wrong grain. This one has nothing to do with the cook itself and everything to do with the last 30 seconds before serving, but it matters just as much. Brisket has 2 separate muscles running in different directions, the flat and the point. And if you slice straight through without adjusting your angle at the seam, you'll end up with tough, stringy slices, even from a perfectly cooked piece of meat. Always slice against the grain and rotate your cutting angle when you hit the seam between the 2 muscles. Now here's the thing. Everything I just walked you through, the 2-zone fire, the airflow management, reading the stall, cooking to temperature, resting properly, the gear, the wood choices, the seasoning, that's the real foundation. That's genuinely the core of what makes barbecue work. And if you took nothing else from this video and just applied those steps, you'd already be cooking circles around what most people manage at home. But I'll be straight with you. Knowing the principles and executing them flawlessly on your first few cooks are 2 different things. There's a reason it took me the better part of a year of trial and error, a lot of ruined briskets, and more than one very disappointing Father's Day to get consistent. I didn't have anybody walking me through it step by step. I was piecing it together from forums, from videos, from calling my uncle and asking increasingly specific questions about airflow. I burned through more meat than I'd like to admit just figuring out how my specific grill behaved in different weather. That's exactly why I put together the Texas BBQ playbook. It's everything I just described, but broken down into an actual structured system instead of a scattered list of tips. The specific temperature targets for different cuts, exact timing windows adjusted for weight and thickness, the rub ratios my family's used for 3 generations, troubleshooting for exactly what to do when your fire runs hot, runs cold, or the stall drags on longer than expected. It's built so you're not guessing, and so your second cook is dramatically better than your first, instead of taking you a full year of ruined meat to get there the way it took me. I'll leave the link down in the description, and there's a QR code on screen right now if you want to just point your phone at it and pull it up directly. That's the Texas BBQ playbook, linked right there and in the description below. If you're tired of paying restaurant prices for something your own backyard can genuinely outperform once you know what you're doing, that's exactly what it's built to fix. I think about my grandfather's line a lot now. The fire's not cooking the meat, the fire's cooking the air, and the air's cooking the meat. It sounds almost too simple to matter, but once you actually understand it, you can't unsee it. Every piece of good barbecue you've ever eaten was made by someone who understood that principle, whether they could put it into words or not. You don't need a $5,000 smoker, you don't need a trailer, a line out the door, or reclaimed wood walls. You need a cheap piece of equipment, a 2-zone fire, patience through the stall, and the willingness to trust the process even when it feels like nothing's happening. I haven't paid $41 for a half rack of ribs since that day in the parking lot, and honestly, I don't think I ever will again. Once you know the trick, there's no version of this where you go back. If this helped you, hit subscribe, because I've got a lot more of this old school, actually useful barbecue knowledge coming. None of the Instagram influencer nonsense, just what actually works. Drop a comment and tell me the worst barbecue mistake you have ever made, because I promise you, whatever it is, I've probably made it worse. And go check out the playbook, links right there. I'll see you in the next one. Now go light a fire.